They say some land only bears fruit when watered with tears, and that sometimes trembling hands can still hold up the sky of an entire town. In Dry Creek Hollow, tucked between brittle stones and dusty roads, lived Miss Eleanor Briggs, a widowed farmer with a bent back and a voice cracked by time. No one ever passed by her small farmstead. Some said she was crazy, others just called her stubborn. But everyone agreed on one thing: she didn't know how to give up. Every morning, Eleanor rose before the sun. She spoke to her old mule Dusty, like it was the last family she had left, and planted corn and beans in a patch of dry land nobody else wanted. The drought had hit hard. Most folks had sold, packed up, or moved away. But not her. She stayed, with a shovel, a worn Bible, and a quiet, unshakable faith. When she asked for help at the general store, doors closed in her face, or she was handed leftovers. "Why keep planting on land that's already dead?" they'd mutter. But what the town didn't know was that Eleanor didn't plant just to eat. She planted out of a promise. One made beside a grave, with her hands in wet soil and her heart in pieces. She had no husband anymore, no children, no water. But she had something few folks still carried: conviction. The kind born from a broken, but still beating soul. And just when it seemed like nothing could ever change, the land, like life, finally decided to answer. Hello my friends, I'm Roger, your storyteller from the Country Life Rural Stories channel. Leave your like and subscribe to the channel. Our story today is The Woman No One Helped, who ended up saving a town with her hands and her faith. Eleanor Briggs had lived on that patch of land for over 30 years, the same land her father once tilled with bare hands and sunburned arms. It was there she married her late husband, there she buried him beneath an old sycamore tree, and there she watched both her sons leave, one swallowed by the promise of city money, the other lost to pride and silence. Since then, she talked more to her chickens than to people. The only creature that truly responded to her kindness was Dusty, her old ash-gray mule, who followed her around like he understood the weight she carried in her heart. One chilly January afternoon, Eleanor stood in the cracked soil with a rusted hoe, lifting dry earth as the sun burned overhead. There were no clouds, no breeze, just a fierce, blue sky that split hope in half. "Lord, if you're gonna take me, do it after the rose bloom, not before," she whispered. It wasn't a prayer born from fear, but from surrender. From someone with no one left to impress, still clinging to a promise she had made, to plant one last crop in honor of her husband. The folks in town looked at her with pity. Some said her mind had slipped. Others offered to buy the land for pennies. "Ma'am, you'd be better off staying with your sons. This land ain't good for goats anymore," a local trader once told her. Eleanor smiled softly and said nothing. She knew her sons weren't coming back. And she knew, somehow, that this tired earth still remembered those who had once loved it. One evening, as she cooked tough beans in a blackened pot over her wood stove, a knock came at the door. It was a skinny boy with pale eyes, no older than 10. "My mama won't wake up, and I'm scared," he said. Eleanor didn't flinch. She handed him a plate of food and let him sleep on an old cot near the stove. She didn't ask questions, just told him, "There ain't much here, but there's peace." By morning, the boy, whom she would soon call Matthew, tried to help. He grabbed the shovel, chased the chickens, and rubbed Dusty's ears like they'd known each other forever. Quietly, the house began to breathe different air, as if something forgotten had started to stir again. Eleanor didn't say it aloud, but she gave thanks, not for the boy himself, but for the company. Sometimes, the soul doesn't need answers, just presence. In the days that followed, Matthew learned there were no toys or television here. But there were stories, rows to till, fires to build, and a silence that didn't weigh heavy. He started calling her Grandma. Eleanor didn't correct him, though deep down, she feared getting too attached. She knew that anything good that comes can also be taken away. One morning Matthew asked, "Why do you plant if folks say nothing grows here?" Eleanor looked at him for a long time before answering. "I don't plant expecting it to grow. I plant because it's how I stay alive." The boy didn't fully understand, but he repeated those words more than once when thinking of his own mother. Whispers started in town that the old woman had taken in a runaway, that the boy was a thief or a burden. But no one dared come up the hill. Folks had a strange kind of respect, or maybe fear, not of what Eleanor might do, but of what she represented, a truth too many had forgotten. That land, like a heart, sometimes just needs someone to believe in it again. The days began to fall into a new rhythm on the little farm. Matthew would wake to the crowing roosters and head straight to the pen to find Dusty. The old mule, calm and wise, greeted him with a soft snort, like a tired grandmother. Though one of her legs had dragged for years, Dusty still hauled water in buckets and dragged the plow through the stubborn soil, as if she knew this work meant more than just planting crops. Eleanor, with her straw hat and hunched back, moved between the rows like time couldn't touch her. "Set the seed down with care," she told the boy. "Don't just throw it. The ground feels it." Matthew had never heard an adult speak to the earth that way, and something inside him began to change. He stopped running wild. He listened more. To the land, to the mule, and to that grandmother who seemed carved from the very dust she worked. One afternoon, as they dug side by side, Matthew's shovel hit something hard. Beneath the soil was a thick, gnarled root. "Mesquite," Eleanor muttered. "Tougher than all of us put together." Instead of cutting through it, they worked around it. "We'll plant beside it. What survives, we don't tear down." Those words etched themselves into Matthew like a quiet truth. Not every obstacle is meant to be removed. Some are there to hold things up. But outside that farm, the world was shifting. In town, the heat climbed higher, the rain stayed away, and the well water ran low. Folks grew restless, their eyes down, their spirits dry. Some sold their livestock. Others mortgaged what little they had left. The local bar filled with arguments and bad debt. Desperation clung to the air like smoke. One day, Matthew went to town for salt. The storekeeper gave him a sideways glance. "And who might you be, kid?" he asked. When he heard Matthew was living with Eleanor Briggs, he scoffed. "With the witch up on the ridge?" Matthew didn't flinch. He lifted his head and replied, "With the woman who gave me bread when no one else would." Then he walked out, salt in his pocket and pride in his chest. That night, Eleanor listened to the story in silence. She didn't say much, just added 2 extra tortillas to the plate. Not out of hunger, but out of pride. Matthew wasn't just a boy she'd taken in. He was taking root. And though she never showed it, she prayed each night that no one would come to take him. Not family. Not the law. Not life itself. Because when something good finds you, there's always a danger it'll be taken. Dusty, though quiet, seemed to understand. She watched the boy closely, nudged him when he got distracted, and stood between him and the harsh sun when he worked. Eleanor joked the mule was jealous. But deep down, she knew. Animals feel what words cannot say. Then, one morning, something happened. While checking the rows, Matthew shouted, "Grandma, look!" A tiny corn sprout had pushed up through the cracked earth. No taller than a finger, but alive. Eleanor knelt beside it, stared at it for a long while, and let a tear fall. Not for the plant, but for what it meant. The land was waking up. The news of that first sprout wasn't spoken out loud, but it felt sacred, like a secret prayer shared only between Eleanor, Matthew, and Dusty. Each morning, they walked through the furrows in silence, as if entering a church. And little by little, more green shoots broke through the soil. Fragile, determined, defying the drought like tiny miracles. As if the land, tired of being ignored, had finally decided to speak. Eleanor didn't throw a party. She didn't brag. She just kept working, her wrinkled hands pressing seeds into the earth with the same care a mother gives to a newborn. But inside, something stirred. Not pride, something older. Something her own mother had whispered long ago. When you respect the land, it gives back with gratitude. Meanwhile, Matthew couldn't stop asking questions, writing everything down in an old notebook he'd found in the attic. One morning, as they fixed the chicken coop, a visitor appeared. Mrs. Ramona Crowley, a neighbor from way down the valley, came up the dusty road for the first time in years. Her face was red from the sun, her breath shallow.
"Eleanor, is it true? Are your fields really growing?"
The old woman didn't answer. She simply led Ramona to the rows. When Ramona saw the green stalks pushing up through the dust, she crossed herself. This ain't natural." The next day, another neighbor showed up. Then 2 more. Then 5. And just like that, folks started trickling in, not out of gossip, but out of hope. They came to see, to touch the soil, to ask questions. Some offered to buy seeds. Others wanted to know how she did it. Eleanor served black coffee and gave them no promises.
"I don't have a formula,"
she'd say.
"Just faith and care."
Most left more puzzled than when they came. In town, the story spread like wildfire.
"The old lady made corn grow. She must have made a deal with the Lord." Others say her mule's got magic in her.
The versions were endless. Curiosity turned into pilgrimage. Even the county deputy showed up one afternoon, wearing a clean hat and a skeptical frown.
"Everything legal here, Miss Briggs?"
Eleanor looked him dead in the eye.
"Just the miracle of working without stopping."
Matthew watched all of this from the porch. He felt proud, but afraid. So many people, so many eyes. What if someone took his grandma away? What if the peace they'd built started to crack? That night, Dusty slept by the front gate, standing like a sentry. Eleanor stroked her mane and whispered,
"Don't worry, girl. They won't take what we planted with truth."
A few days later, the quiet routine was interrupted again. A young woman named Clara Harris arrived, carrying a tired 5-year-old girl in her arms.
"Can I help?"
she asked.
"My husband left us, and we've got nowhere else to go."
Eleanor didn't hesitate. She offered a cot, a bowl of stew, and a job shucking corn. Just like that, the house began to fill, not with noise, but with life. Matthew, watching little Lucy run barefoot between the rows, felt something strange in his chest. For the first time, he didn't feel alone. And Eleanor, seeing Clara hum while flipping tortillas, thought maybe, just maybe, the Lord hadn't forgotten her. He was just waiting for the right moment to return everything she'd planted. With Clara and little Lucy now part of the homestead, Miss Eleanor's place no longer felt like a lonely refuge. In the mornings, the sounds of children's laughter blended with the crow of roosters and the steady clop of Dusty's hooves across the yard. Clara, humble but grateful, took every chore as a chance to give back. She swept the porch, fed the chickens, and sowed seeds beside Eleanor, not with questions, but with quiet care. Matthew became fiercely protective of Lucy. He took her to the well, taught her how to ride Dusty, and told her stories about the stars, the crickets, and the magic rows of corn. Sometimes, when she fell asleep curled up on his lap, he wondered if this was what it meant to have a real family. And for the first time, he didn't want to leave. But peace doesn't always last. One morning, Clara returned pale from a trip to town. She'd seen him, her ex-husband, loitering near the square. A violent man, the same one she'd escaped during a stormy night, carrying only her daughter and a threadbare blanket.
If he finds us, he'll take her. He'll take both of us.
Eleanor looked her in the eyes and said firmly,
He's not taking anyone. This land is yours now, too.
Matthew overheard from the hallway. That night, he walked to the barn, ran his hands down Dusty's side, and whispered,
If that man comes back, he doesn't get through.
The old mule snorted loudly and planted her hooves deep in the mud. She was old, but not weak, just like the woman who raised her. Meanwhile, back in town, the drought worsened. The riverbed cracked. Cattle dropped weight. And eyes began to turn toward Eleanor's green oasis with envy.
Why's her corn still growing? That ain't right.
Gossip turned sour. One night, someone broke a fence. Another night, chickens went missing. Soon, it felt like they were guarding a treasure, not just crops. Eleanor didn't fold. She rebuilt the fence, left Ash at the doorstep, and prayed louder. Clara, worried, suggested they leave.
Maybe we should go before it gets worse.
But Eleanor stood her ground.
We don't run from folks with drier hearts than this soil. We stand our ground.
Her voice was tired, but unshakable. The words clung to the adobe walls like a warning. Then one morning, they found a crude wooden cross stabbed into the dirt road, bound with twine. It was a threat. Eleanor picked it up, tied dry flowers around it, and placed it by the fire pit.
Evil comes in many shapes,
she said softly.
But the fire we carry inside doesn't bow to fear.
It was in that moment that Clara, Matthew, and Lucy finally understood this farm wasn't just a safe place. It was a symbol, a living act of defiance against fear, neglect, and despair. And every seed that sprouted, every tortilla shared, every whispered prayer, was a deeper root no storm could rip free. The harvest began to grow in ways no one expected. Eleanor Briggs's fields, once brittle and bare, now shimmered with golden corn, vines of beans climbing up makeshift poles, and pumpkins hiding beneath broad green leaves. It was a miracle in the middle of a dying region. The air around the farm smelled like fresh corn and quiet hope. Clara wept when she saw the rows full, not because of the food, but because she felt something she hadn't felt in years, belief.
This is God's work, isn't it?
She asked. Eleanor only nodded.
God and Dusty,
she said with a crooked smile, pointing at the mule who chewed her hay under the sun with a calm older than time. Matthew moved through the rows like he'd been born there. His small hands, though still young, were steady. He could tell a good ear of corn from a bad one, and he knew how to harvest without harming the stalk. When a local TV crew heard whispers about
the miracle on the ridge
and showed up for an interview, Eleanor sat on her wooden bench and told it straight.
A miracle? No. Just hard work, stubbornness, and faith. That's all I've got.
Still, the story spread like wind-blown seed. People came from neighboring counties, some with questions, some out of curiosity, many with hunger. Eleanor welcomed them with strong coffee and plain words. She didn't preach. She taught, showed them how to compost, how to store seeds, how to treat the soil like something alive. A soil scientist came with charts, lab results, and clipboards. He asked what fertilizer she used, what chemical treatments she gave the land. He left confused when he found no chemicals, no modern tricks. Just rough hands, time, and kindness.
I don't understand how it works,
he said. Clara, standing nearby, replied,
That's because you're looking for answers in numbers. Around here, we plant with our soul.
But not everyone clapped. A group of local ranchers, deep in debt and bitter with jealousy, began to spread rumors.
That old woman's stealing our water,
they said. The county deputy returned, this time with a colder voice.
"Miss Briggs, you're disrupting the balance."
She looked at him with tired pity.
"The balance broke when folks stopped believing land was life and started treating it like profit."
That night, someone lit the edge of the cornfield on fire. Matthew smelled the smoke first, ran from the barn yelling. Dusty brayed like thunder, kicked open the gate, and helped lead Clara and Eleanor in throwing buckets of water until the flames died down. Little Lucy clutched a sack of corn, crying. At sunrise, one corner of the field was blackened, but the heart of it still stood. So did they. Instead of mourning, Eleanor scooped ashes from the ground and scattered them over the soil.
"Let what came to destroy now feed the roots."
That sentence became a prayer. And in the following days, even stronger shoots rose from the burned ground, as if the earth itself was grateful, as if it finally knew it was no longer alone. One afternoon, as Matthew gathered eggs from the henhouse, he saw a pickup truck climbing the dirt road, big, loud, and unfamiliar. Inside sat a broad-shouldered man behind the wheel. Clara saw it too from the kitchen window and turned pale.
"It's him,"
she whispered. Little Lucy clung to her side. Eleanor stepped outside slowly, with Dusty trailing behind her like a shadow. The air grew still. Even the wind held its breath. The man got out like he owned the place.
"I've come for my daughter,"
he said coldly.
"You've got no right keeping her from me."
Clara stood between him and the girl.
"You're not taking her."
Eleanor didn't speak. She walked to Dusty, stroked the old mule's side, and Dusty stepped forward, blocking the man like a living wall.
"What, you think you can stop me with a mule?"
he sneered. Eleanor raised her chin.
"With a mule, and everything this land stands for."
Clara grabbed Lucy's hand. Matthew stepped beside them. The man glanced around for backup, but found only silence. A heavy silence that surrounded him like judgment. He muttered threats as he turned and left.
"I'll be back. This ain't over."
That night was the longest they'd ever known. Clara wept quietly. Lucy wouldn't let go of her blanket. Eleanor didn't sleep. She sat upright, clutching her rosary, whispering prayers. Dusty stood by the front gate till morning, firm as a soldier. She knew a fight wasn't just coming. It had already begun. But the man didn't return the next day, nor the one after. Instead, a letter arrived from the county courthouse. A local woman, moved by what she witnessed, had filed a report on Clara's behalf. A lawyer would come to evaluate the case. Clara trembled.
"What if they take her away from me?"
Eleanor cupped her face gently.
"This land already adopted her, and land doesn't let go of its own."
Meanwhile, the crops kept growing. Corn, beans, squash, even wildflowers began blooming between the rows. Folks from town, once suspicious, began to show up with offerings. Milk in exchange for seeds. Bread for vegetables. Some came just to sit under the old oak and listen to Eleanor's stories. What was once seen as cursed had become sacred. Matthew had an idea.
"Let's build a little outdoor kitchen,"
he said,
"for anyone who comes hungry."
Eleanor agreed. Clara cooked, Matthew served, and Lucy handed out tortillas with flour-covered hands. That little farm tucked into the ridge had become something more than a homestead. It had become a place of life. Not a miracle, a reward for not giving up. Eleanor, sitting on her bench at dusk, whispered,
"You don't plant for yourself. You plant for the ones who'll come after."
No one heard her say it. But her words hung in the corn stalks like a promise, because sometimes justice doesn't come with thunder. Sometimes it arrives in the shape of children, of mules, of broken women who refuse to break. A few days later, the county lawyer arrived in an official vehicle, accompanied by a social worker. Clara met them at the door, apron still on, hands dusted with cornmeal, heart pounding. Little Lucy hid behind Dusty, who stood tall and still, a living shield. Eleanor invited them to sit beneath the old oak tree. She didn't offer excuses, only hot coffee and honest words. The lawyer asked about living conditions, the nature of the relationships, why Clara had never filed charges.
"Because fear doesn't keep a schedule,"
Clara said. The social worker watched Lucy stroke Dusty's ears, watched Matthew pour water into chipped glasses, watched the rows of blooming crops around them. There was no luxury, but there was order, care, and a love that didn't pretend. When they left, the lawyer offered no promises, just a quiet,
"We'll return with a decision."
Clara's hand shook. Eleanor held them tight.
"And if they don't give us justice,"
she said,
"we'll grow it ourselves."
That night, the fire in the hearth burned brighter, not from cold, but defiance. As if the flames knew they were keeping fear away. Back in town, people who once mocked Eleanor began to shift. Mrs. Ramona brought 3 old hens and asked to learn how to grow beans.
"I don't want my grandkids to go hungry like I did."
Another neighbor, widowed and soft-spoken, offered to fix the broken fence in exchange for a few seeds. Eleanor nodded.
"We don't charge here. We share what the earth gives."
Matthew had another idea. He started a notebook titled The Book of Lessons. Every visitor could write down something they'd learned. It filled up quickly, with lines that were simple but deep.
"Plant without fear. Forgive without forgetting. The land doesn't belong to the buyer. It belongs to the one who cares for it."
That notebook became sacred. The written word became a root. One afternoon, as they watered the tomatoes, a letter arrived. Official seal. Clara read it aloud, voice cracking between words. The judge had granted her full custody of Lucy, recognizing the homestead as a stable, loving environment. Lucy jumped for joy. Eleanor closed her eyes, and for the first time in years, cried without pain. The town celebrated in its own way. A mariachi band volunteered to play. Neighbors brought bread, sweets, and wildflowers. Matthew hung streamers between the trees. Lucy danced barefoot in the dirt. And Dusty, old and tired, watched from the shade, flicking her ears like she was blessing the celebration. Eleanor, seated by the fire pit, whispered into the breeze,
"Thank you, old man, for leaving me this land. I'm not alone anymore."
That night, under the stars, someone asked Eleanor if she was afraid things might fall apart again. She answered softly,
"What you plant with fear, the wind will take. But what you plant with love, not even death can uproot."
And silence fell, not from sadness, but from knowing they were witnessing something rare. Something that doesn't make headlines, but changes lives. With the arrival of the rains, Eleanor's land turned into a mosaic of life. Wildflowers bloomed between the rows. Young corn stretched tall in the fields. Birds that hadn't been seen in years returned to sing at dawn. Her small farm, once forgotten and dry, had become a symbol, a quiet revolution born from silence, faith, and shared labor. Matthew, now taller and wiser, helped younger neighbors prepare their own plots. He was no longer a lost boy. He walked with purpose, knowing exactly where he belonged. Clara began teaching other women to cook with garden harvests. And little Lucy, with her tangled braids and strong voice, ran through the trees like each branch knew her name. One day, a group of rural schoolteachers came up the road. They'd heard about the
miracle on the ridge
and wanted to learn from Eleanor. She welcomed them under the big oak tree.
"I'm not here to teach,"
she said gently.
"Just sharing what the land has whispered to me over the years."
She showed them how to read the soil by its color, how to save rainwater, how to give thanks with every seed. One teacher, moved to tears, proposed creating a small agroecology school right there.
"So children can learn early not to be afraid of the land."
Eleanor didn't respond at first. She just looked to Matthew. He nodded. And so, what began as one woman's promise turned into a shared future. As they started building the adobe classroom, Dusty stopped getting up. Her body had finally given out, though her eyes were still alert. Eleanor stayed by her side all night.
"Thank you, old girl," she whispered. "You were more than a mule. You were my cane, my shadow, my shield."
At dawn, Dusty passed away with her head resting in Lucy's lap. The corral felt empty. Their hearts did too. They buried Dusty beneath the tallest tree. Clara laid flowers. Matthew placed a wooden cross. Lucy tied a small bell that rang softly with the wind. Eleanor didn't cry. But that afternoon, she said little. She walked the rows slowly, almost speaking to the earth itself.
"The last of my memories is gone, but she left me this family," she murmured.
The town, once distant, now stood guard over her land. Some called it
the Field of Hope.
Others simply said
Eleanor's place.
It had no gates, no riches, but everyone knew it held something no money could buy, real roots. Eleanor aged with grace. Her hand still steady, her back more bent, her eyes clearer than ever. No longer the crazy old woman on the ridge, she had become the town's grandmother. Every afternoon, under the old oak, she told the story of how one day she refused to give up, and the land, grateful, gave everything back. The years passed. Eleanor's land kept producing, not because it needed to prove anything, but because it had finally become what she always knew it could be. Corn grew in its own rhythm. Rain came on time. And the children who once came just to look now tilled the soil with their own hands. The little schoolhouse was finished, made of adobe, salvaged wood, and hope. They named it with pride, Dusty Ridge School. Matthew, nearly 18, made his choice. He turned down jobs in the city.
"This is where I grew up. This is where I belong,"
he said. Clara became a voice for the women in town, organizing garden cooperatives and sharing old recipes she had learned beside Eleanor. And Lucy, with her long braids and bold voice, read stories to children beneath the oak tree where silence once ruled. Eleanor didn't walk much anymore, but her presence was stronger than ever. She sat at the front porch, wrapped in a faded shawl, eyes full of knowing. She didn't speak often. She didn't need to. The children greeted her with respect. Some didn't know her whole story, but they knew everything started with her, and a mule treated like family. One September afternoon, with the sky painted in amber and the scent of fresh corn in the air, Eleanor called Matthew to her side. She placed an old rosary in his hand, worn, fragile, then a single seed wrapped in cloth.
"Land isn't something you inherit,"
she said.
"It's something you care for. Promise me you'll never plant in a rush, and never harvest without giving thanks."
Matthew, holding back tears, nodded. Eleanor closed her eyes and never opened them again. The funeral was simple. Candles lit. Wildflowers gathered. Prayers whispered. They buried her next to Dusty, beneath the same tall oak. Clara sang an old song passed down from her grandmother. Lucy laid a bundle of fresh basil. And Matthew, hands dirty from digging, lowered the last handful of earth. He didn't cry. He just bowed his head, the way you do for someone great. In the month that followed, the farm became a meeting ground. Teachers, farmers, young people seeking wisdom, they all came. Eleanor's story was passed along between harvests, shared by firelight, spoken beneath trees and across rows of green. Her voice was gone, but her teachings were everywhere, in how people watered, how they planted, how they thanked the soil. On Sundays, the kids still gathered under the oak. Matthew would sit them down and tell the tale of a woman, forgotten, dismissed, who turned a broken piece of land into a shared miracle. No magic, just calloused hands, quiet wisdom, and seeds sown with faith. And when the littlest ones asked if it was true, he'd point to the cornfields and say,
"Ask the land."
And so, without statues or applause, Miss Eleanor Briggs became a root. Not the kind you see, but the kind that holds everything together. And the town that once ignored her? Now it honored her in every sprout, every shared meal, and in every child who learned to plant without fear. They say some people are born to be forgotten, but there are others who choose to become roots. Miss Eleanor Briggs never had fame. She didn't chase wealth. No monuments were built in her name. What she had was a patch of tired land, a mule with more heart than strength, and a quiet faith that never gave up. Her life wasn't loud. It was slow, steady, planted deep in the soil of service and sacrifice. She didn't build an empire. She didn't appear in magazines. But she changed the future of an entire town without ever raising her voice. Her story wasn't carved in stone. It was etched in the hands of every child who learned to sew with love, in every meal shared under the oak tree, in every laugh that rose from the dust. In a world where so many leave searching for
a better life,
Eleanor stayed behind to protect the one life worth remembering, the life of the land, of dignity, of second chances. Because in the end, a legacy isn't what you leave behind in your name. It's what keeps growing after you're gone. And what Miss Eleanor Briggs left behind was not just a farm. It was a home, a lesson, a promise that the rain does come, that broken people can still heal, and that sometimes the strongest roots grow in the quietest places. We have reached the end of our story. Leave your like, share, comment, and subscribe to the channel. See you next time.